Hey everybody, Reverend Winnebago here, and I apologize completely that the audio on this one is probably going to suck, but I just moved into a new apartment because of my job, and I'm still getting the kinks worked out. And as you can hear, it is an absolute nightmare in here with all kinds of noise, so we'll see what we can do. I was inspired to do this specific video because of Colttaine in his video MGTOW Unified Theory of the Human Condition. Given the vast changes that have happened to humanity in the past century, I would have figured by now we would have had a major philosophical revolution. I think in some ways, as people say all classical philosophy is essentially footnotes to Socrates, I think at this point we can say that all modern philosophy are just footnotes to Nietzsche. I mean, if you're looking for a role model of a MGTOW philosopher, you can hardly get any closer than Nietzsche. A central theme in Nietzsche's philosophy, as well as in his life in general, was the idea of getting away from society, and that in fact a certain distance is required in order to be able to get the perspective that you need on society. Nietzsche would often put this in terms of that you need to, for example, be an eagle and soar above the rest of society so that you can look down upon it and understand its flaws. I think there are also a lot of striking similarities in that Nietzsche conducted a lot of correspondence using, his day's most advanced communication, which was letter writing, and so many of his ideas are expounded as much in his letter writing as in his actual books. I think that's definitely the same way with MGTOW, where, even if people are putting out books like, I know Barbarossa is thinking about putting out a book, even where people are putting out that kind of material, the real core of everything, the basis of it and the real context for it can be found mostly online in the YouTube community. But there was another side of Nietzsche that I think that is equally important and that the movement needs to be just as informed by, which was that Nietzsche felt very powerfully that it was important to expose yourself to nature. He was famous for taking long walks and bringing a journal with him so that he could jot down ideas as he came up with them while he was taking walks through the Alps. Nietzsche even said that the inspiration for one of his most powerful ideas came from a certain rock that he found by a lake. Now, I think one of the most powerful of all of Nietzsche's ideas was his concept of the overturning of values. Now, there are a lot of different interpretations for what exactly he meant by the idea of overturning of values, but one aspect most everybody can agree on is that Nietzsche held that almost every time a society in the past had codified some set of values, that the codification of their values was essentially the point where their society started to take a downfall. He phrased it that coming up with a moral system changed things from, merely being good and bad, such as, someone not doing labor that they should be doing to help out a village. Well, maybe that's just a bad thing. Once, say, a religion comes into the picture, then all of a sudden that thing is good versus evil. And, of course, evil needs to be stomped out, so instead of a farmer merely being a bad person for not doing his fair share, well, now he's evil. He needs to be stamped out. We have to kill this person and drive them out of the village. The problem from there becomes exactly, what kind of a moral system are we going to have if we, put in place the rule that anytime you set down a moral system, that this necessarily causes things to go wrong. This is one of the biggest criticisms of Nietzsche, essentially, that people think his ideas eventually result in moral relativism. And again, I'll draw a parallel to MGTOW because, with something like the idea of the marriage strike, where, men are essentially saying that they're just never going to go back to the plantation, people say, well, that's only a negative. You're only taking away from society. What are you going to put back in order to, make up for what you're taking away? And recently I've become a little bit critical of essentially Western Enlightenment values, essentially for this kind of problem, where I think one of the big problems with how the Enlightenment has been received in the West is that it demands constant exponential progress. Every single year you need to be 5% more moral than you were last year, and that compounds every single year. If you're a business, you need to be 5% more profitable every year. I think that this is often inextricably tied, at least to how people interpret Enlightenment values. I'm going to link to a video called 21st Century Enlightenment from the RSA that goes into this a little bit more deeply if you want to explore that point. Now, in the video from RSA, the point is made that they essentially believe that the way to overcome this problem with unlimited progress is with human compassion. Sort of saying, if we would all just be more moral people, well, then corporations wouldn't rip people off and science wouldn't create atom bombs because we'd all care for each other a little more. I just don't think that's going to work. I mean, a big part of the Enlightenment is the scientific process, and the scientific process is one which is always going to be moving. It's always self-correcting, it's always trying to find new ideas, it's exploring new territories. And when you base anything, markets, even human compassion off of that, you're always going to be looking for ways to refine that, to make it better. And again, you end up in this situation where you don't just need to be empathic, you need to be 5% more empathic than you were yesterday. And you need to do that again and again with compounding interest. Now, this butts right up against other discussions about whether technology is going to enable humans to surpass their own limitations. We might talk about the environment, for instance, where people say, oh, well, we don't have to worry about garbage because at some point we're just going to invent some kind of universal recycling system that'll take all the garbage and turn it back into useful material. Now, while that sounds like a really cool idea, I think anybody who wants to research the issue a little bit is going to find some major problems with the laws of thermodynamics. Essentially, once you turn things into crap, it takes more energy to try and bring them back to a state where they are more useful again. You end up putting more energy into the system, but you don't magically get any more energy in that process. You could only wind up with the exact same amount of energy that you started with, less what you've wasted in heat from the process. So there is a maximum theoretical limit to what we can possibly do with recycling and growth-enabling technology and what have you. But we live in a world where population growth is expected. I mean, can you just imagine, what would happen to stock market outlooks if tomorrow there was data that America suddenly lost 5–10% of its population? That's just unimaginable. You can't possibly have a modern society where you're actually losing. Whether you're losing people or profits or whatever it is, you don't always need to be going up. You have to always be making more. Just imagine a company like Apple Computer reporting that their revenue stream isn't growing, that they're just making the same amount of money that they made last year and the year before, and they do this for 5 or 6 years in a row. Nobody would accept that. But I think in the long term, as we work toward a new understanding of human nature, we're going to have to realize that, in fact, this sort of sustainable long-term trend is exactly what we need. Just to propose a thought experiment, imagine if there is a human society which is completely unsustainable, which is ruining its environment, and there's absolute proof that they are going to drive themselves out of existence within the next few generations. Would you imagine that that society would just go quietly into the night? Would that society just understand that the choices that they had made were going to lead to the end of society and just plan accordingly and let everything wind down? Of course, I think we know because of human nature, the survival instinct is going to be too powerful, and so they're going to claw at any chance that they can figure out to exist, even if it's just ignoring the inevitable end until after it's already happened, and they're just going to keep limping on as long as they can. You can't talk about a society being a free market of ideas when there are forces like that which completely control the domain over which people can think and act. And as Colttaine points out, there are other aspects of the Enlightenment that may be equally troubling. In particular, the fact that we are in fact different from each other. The grand idea that all men were created equal just turns out not to be the case. Whether it's biological, some people are just born differently from others, and as MGTOW focuses on, potentially men are different from women. But there are plenty of other factors as well, such as your environment. If you're born into a poor family, sure, you might have the same sorts of opportunities as everybody else, but because you start from so much lower, your statistical odds of ever clawing your way up are lower. Whereas someone who, maybe isn't as qualified but happened to be born with a head start, they might get further, or even just personal choice. People could just choose to be crappy and poor and live in squalor, and at some point we have to recognize that maybe some people are just going to choose that, and there's not a lot we can do about it. So then, of course, the question, what exactly do I propose to replace the current model? Well, first of all, I just want to say, I don't know. I'm still doing research. If there's one thing that I could say that I want to add to the conversation, however, it's just that stability should be its own virtue. If someone wants to do, especially like Vention, I think that he is a real role model for this. Vention, is growing his own food. He's trying to become, sort of a bit of a prepper, just take care of himself and try to live his own life. I think that that is definitely a role model that a lot more people could follow. But hey, I'm running up against my self-imposed 10-minute time limit so quickly. I just want to give a shout out to the mayor of MGTOWN for linking to my channel. Thank you, brother. You absolutely rock. I will link to everything I can in the description. And until next time, and until hopefully I get some of these sound issues sorted out, have a good one. This is the Reverend Winnebago signing off.